Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this late afternoon evening's webinar hosted in partnership between AMS and Chiltern Learning Trust. Marcus, you can hear me okay? Great. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. No problem at all.
Great. No problem. Firstly, Marcus, thank you very much for giving up your time this afternoon. I know it's late, probably after a long, hard day's shift at school, but it's great to have you here. I don't really want to spend too much time because I know everybody's really keen and eager to let everybody know, and for yourself, Marcus, this event itself actually wasn't advertised with too much notice, but actually we've had more interest in this particular course than any other out of the 8 that we've promoted. So no pressure on you, Marcus. So just by way of introduction, I guess, for those that aren't familiar with AMS, the Association of Muslim Schools, the association is an umbrella organization that looks after the interests of independent and state-run Muslim schools all over the UK. It's been around since 1992, and it's all about promoting excellence by way of education in Muslim schools. And what better way to do that than to partner with Chiltern Learning Trust. It's a partnership that developed, I think, just over or just under a year ago, and we've done so much since then. And this webinar is the first of 8 webinars that are planned as part of a CPD webinar series that we're hoping to complete over the next couple of months. So let me just introduce Marcus to everybody and go through some housekeeping, and then we'll get straight into it. So with regards to housekeeping, the session will finish at 6:30. Me and Marcus had a quick chat. He's quite flexible. And he's happy to take questions as he's running the session. What I would ask is if we can use the functionality where you put your hands up, and what I'll do is I'll probably just unmute you so you can ask the question. Anytime, Marcus, where you just want to carry on with the flow, you know, if you don't want to take questions at that point, we're happy to carry on. With regards to this session itself, it's going to be recorded, or is being recorded as we speak, and it will be uploaded onto YouTube. The usual question, Marcus is also happy to share his slides, so I'll email that out to everybody a little bit later. And if you do have any other questions throughout the webinar for the next hour and a half, if you're feeling a bit shy, you can put the question on the chat group. There was one question that came through as part of the registration, which I'll cover with Marcus right at the end. And aside from that, I'm your host for this webinar. I'll be silent probably for the vast majority of for the next hour and a half, probably just taking some questions and closing. My name's Abdul Wadood. And Marcus has put me in a bit of a predicament because when we were discussing his introduction, I was actually quite overwhelmed by the amount of things actually he's done within his expertise in maths. His current role at the moment is Director of Maths for Chiltern Learning Trust, which has, I believe, 11 schools under its banner. And Marcus, along with one of his colleagues, look after both primary and secondary. So we've really got somebody here who's got a wealth of experience, who's really at the top of their game, and really understands our schools because of what we've done between AMS and Chiltern Learning Trust over the last 9 or 12 months. So without further ado, Marcus, I'll hand over to you, and we'll go from there.
Great, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my slides so you can see them in front of you. And as Abdullah said, at any point, if you want to ask a question, please put it into the chat function or put your hands up, and I'll get Abdullah to help me out with that as well. And I'll make sure that I give you an opportunity at different points to interact and see what your opinions are as well, because not only do I want to pass on some of my learning, I want to also share some of your learning as well, because that'll help your colleagues around you as well. As already been said, my name is Marcus Ray. There's my Twitter handle if you'd like to follow me on Twitter as well. I love to share good practice on there, so not only my own, but good practice. I'm the Director of Primary Mathematics at Chiltern Learning Trust, but that doesn't just mean I focus on the primary schools. So I spend a lot of my time working with my colleague, who's the secondary director of maths, on transition for year 7 and year 8, and making sure we've got continuity of good practice across our schools. Not only that, I've worked with a range of the national associations and agencies over my time, from developing the maths strategy to working with the NCTM, and a little bit with White Rose, so I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But I would majority of the time I spend working with the senior leaders in the school, listening to their experiences, developing good practice with them, sharing good practice around the school, working with other agencies to bring that good practice in. So the whole of my session today is built on not necessarily my own massive good practice, it's built on the massive practice across 11 schools. And as you'll probably know, some of the Chiltern Learning Trust schools have outstanding Ofsted inspections recently. And so that should help us in a big way with sharing some of that good practice and those skills with you. Okay, I'm going to go through my slides over different aspects. So I'd like to talk about different areas, but I'd also like to give you the understanding that I've learned from different range of people. So I know there's probably a range of audience out there as well, from maths subject leaders to people like who are working with NQTs, trainees, heads, people responsible for SEND and EL. I'll try and give you little sort of gold bullets that you can use with all of those and take back and spread that good knowledge as well. The reality is everybody is involved across schools in multiple roles. And majority of those are spent across the primary school. So you could be the head, you could be the maths subject leader, you could be a teacher within the classroom. And I want to give a perspective today of how I can help all of you in those roles, but also how you can work. So it could make you ready for an inspection. It could improve your practice within the school. It could improve your understanding of how you work well within the school. Okay. So I'm hoping that if you've got any questions on that at any point, you can ask them from your perspective and it won't matter either. My understanding is built on amazing good practice from my colleagues, not only in the trust schools, but also from support from people like the HMI. It's also going to hopefully involve future sessions for you from other lead practitioners within our trust, such as Nadine Cotton, Nikki Goodman, Razna Chowdhury. They're all experts in the same field and have done the same sort of work in deep dives that I have. They've done it for English, they've done it for science, they've done it as teaching and learning leads as well. So I am also aware that the education inspection framework has changed and is currently changing. And there is a lot of current practice that's being identified that could be improved within schools. So I will try and cover some of that and some of the latest things that have been covered as well. Throughout, I want to give you 4 key areas that I want you to think about. So in our trust schools, we've been looking very much at being prepared, singing together, knowledge is power, and triangulate and review. Now, being prepared is about everybody in your school knowing what the expectations are, knowing how your practice is in your school, and making sure that you are able to share that with others. So when I talk about singing together, one of the biggest things that you can make sure you do is have continuity across your school in terms of the roles, but in terms of the practice. So things aren't different in classroom A to classroom B. The way you deliver the curriculum has a structure across the school, not built on one corner of the school, another corner of the school, and people doing things in different ways. Third thing, knowledge is power. So the power you have to develop your curriculum, to develop the quality of maths teaching and learning in your school, is all built on how much you know, A, about the subject, but also about the expectations of others when they come to look at the quality and they come to monitor your school practice. Then triangulate and review. And I'll cover all of these in my slides in a few minutes. Triangulate and review is about making sure that what you look at in books, what you look at in practice, what you look at in the CPD that you provide for your staff, that those areas match up and that you haven't got mismatches around the school. So where do we start? Well, 2 key areas, okay, is getting a perspective of all the stakeholders and where they currently think you are. So by stakeholders, I mean the staff, the school leaders, the children, the governors or the board of the school, and knowing what all of those people know about the subject. It's really important in the current inspection frameworks that you understand and you know that, and you're able to get them to speak about it at a level which I talked about earlier, being prepared, singing together, and having the knowledge to be able to talk about it. Then you also need to be able to step back and reflect on all those aspects of the maths curriculum and the changes that are being able to be made, and have a look and see if your curriculum is fit for purpose. So one of the biggest areas that is looked at in inspections at the moment is making sure the subject knowledge is delivered and the curriculum is fit for the purpose of the context of the school. That could be where your school is in terms of how many children you've got, children who might need more support, children with particular needs. It also has to reflect the community in which you're teaching and the community in which those children come from. Two key aspects of where to start: finding a critical friend, somebody who's almost independent of the school and a supportive eye. By that I mean we have in the trust directors of maths, and those are people who can go into the schools, but they can act as a critical friend, but they can also spot good practice, and they ask questions such as why do you do it this way? Not to try and catch people out, but to try and make sure that there is a reason and justification behind why you structure your curriculum a particular way, or you monitor it a particular way, whichever you find works best. But it's having somebody that you know can be that critical friend at the right moment. The last bit on there is about reviewing the provision that you give. Okay, so making that review frequent, but not making it a massive workload, but making sure you're reviewing it to see that the staff are well trained, the provision is in place, the pedagogy that you're using is relevant to A, the children and their needs, but B, the support that they're getting and the teachers that are delivering it, but also the curriculum as well. So reviewing the curriculum. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to think about who you might use as that critical friend and where you might get that independent eye to look over your school. Who might you get to come in and have that conversation with you? The other thing you might want to be thinking about at the same time as that is, at the moment, who is it who gives you a perspective of the quality of the curriculum and the quality of the subject? Right, Abdul, I've just noticed a real technical flaw. My internet has just switched to my mobile phone because my router just turned off, and I think it might be due to a power cut.
Oh, okay.
If I can have just 1 minute, I'm going to mute my phone and my video and run and see if I can turn the trip switch back on. So I literally will be back with you. I'm just trying to see if I can do that now. I literally will be back with you shortly.
No problem. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. We'll just give Marcus just a moment just so he can sort out his internet. In the meantime, like I've said, if anybody has any questions that you want answered throughout the session or you want answered at the end, keep a note of it, and hopefully Marcus will be able to cover those off for us. For those who have just joined us, Marcus is an expert in maths. He's the director of mathematics at the Chiltern Learning Trust, who support 11 schools. He and his colleague look after both primary and secondary, so he's somebody that has a wealth of knowledge across both primary and secondary. There's a couple of questions coming through. Yes, the presentation is being recorded. Hopefully this will be going up over the next couple of days on the AMS YouTube page. And the slide deck and any other resources that Marcus shares with you today will also be emailed over to you over the next day or two. Okay, if there's any other questions, feel free to ask while Marcus has disappeared for a moment. Otherwise, we'll just wait for him. Just to plug a couple of other events whilst we wait for Marcus. If you haven't already seen the poster or the email, AMS has a series of 8 webinars that we're looking to cover over the next couple of months, ranging from deep dives in particular subjects, English and maths, through to SEND best practice, mental health and well-being, a whole range. So if you haven't already registered for those or are thinking whether or not you should do, I would highly recommend that you do, because some of the trainers that we've got through the Chiltern Learning Trust are experts in their field, and they're very well equipped to support us. The other event that I'll bring to your attention is the upcoming AMS launch event for its new RSE curriculum. Again, another very unique event that is a hot topic at the moment. So something that I would also highly recommend that you attend. When you get an opportunity, jump onto the AMS website, ams-uk.org, and you can register for more of those courses. Marcus, you back?
Yeah, sorry about that. My internet and my power seems to be going on and off. I really do apologise. That's a terrible thing to do, but I've managed to switch it to my phone for the time being. If it goes again in a minute, I'll mute it and run back upstairs and return the trip switch back on again. Sorry.
That's okay. The joys of working from home. It's fine.
Right, where was I? Okay. So key points to think about. What have we learned recently, and where have we learned them from? So we've learned recently from the training manual for inspectors. So one of the key things that we did was we had a look into that manual to see in depth what it actually meant for us as curriculum leaders, but what it meant for us as leaders of the school. And for us, it mentions lots of things, but the key things in there are not making changes just for Ofsted purposes and inspection purposes, making sure that the practice that you've got going on in your maths curriculum and your maths delivery, but also across all subjects, making sure it's impacting positively on the children. So not changing it just for an inspection's sake, because what they will notice when they come into your school is that children behave in a different way if you suddenly behave in a different way. Staff will feel less confident delivering something if all of a sudden they're doing something that they don't do as a natural teaching perspective. So you need to make sure it's embedded. So the activities we're going to talk about, they're embedded across the curriculum. They're embedded in activities, not just in one part of the school, but the whole school, all the phases, all the departments and subjects, and not just in maths. Thinking about how the good practice can then be embedded across your curriculum. It's also about knowing the context of your school and the information about your school to say why it's suited to your school. So why is that curriculum suited particularly to your school? Why have you designed it that way? Why do you deliver it? Now I'm going to go through 10 parts of the EIF, and I've picked out 10 key areas that can be focuses for you as a school. Okay, one of them is knowledge, and knowledge can be represented in many different ways. It's about understanding and remembering mathematical concepts, procedures, about knowing the starting point. So I don't just mean the knowledge of the children, I mean the knowledge of the staff, I mean the knowledge of the people who are going to manage the subjects in the school. So making sure everything has a knowledge-based delivery and a knowledge-based structure. Number two, it's about the sequences, and you'll see the phrases that I've underlined in these two slides here and this slide here, they all come out of that inspection framework. And they are things that will help guide you in how you develop your practice in maths across the school. So one of the things they talk about is carefully sequenced, okay? So not just delivering something for the sake of it, making sure it's built on concepts, so knowledge builds on previous knowledge, and that knowledge then leads into the next steps in their knowledge. Not doing things at random times. Then it's about drawing connections between them. You may have heard of the phrases interleaving and revisiting. So interleaving being how long do you leave a topic before you then come back to that topic, to make sure that children's learning is retained and that they don't have to be taught it all over again and they can build on it from previous learning. Now, one of the questions that Abdul was talking to me about earlier was about the mastery curriculum. And one of the things I want to mention later on for support for you guys more than anything else is 3 places where you can look. The EEF, which is the Education Endowment Foundation, White Rose Maths, and the NCETM, which is the National Centre for Excellence in Teaching Mathematics. Now, all of their good practice that they talk about in mathematics is based around mastery, and mastery being built on you don't progress to a next level, you deepen your learning in a topic. So it's not about teaching children the next 2 year groups. So if they're in year 4, it's not about necessarily teaching them the year 5 and year 6 curriculum, even though they may be able to cope with it as out of context. It's about deepening that meaning and understanding through problem solving and reasoning type questions. That's what we're talking about there in interleaving and in revisiting. Okay. Then curriculum being delivered in manageable steps. Okay. Breaking down the curriculum into small parts. Those of you who currently use White Rose will have heard of that phrase before, small steps. Making sure that each aspect of learning is focused on as an individual one that make the building blocks to build the wall. So it's no good trying to teach children something if those small building blocks haven't been put in place first. And it's heavily mentioned in the Education Inspection Framework for Mathematics and across the schools about making sure that learning is always sequential, always built on their prior learning and knowing what that was. So the teacher in their current class needs to know what their learning was in the class previously. They also need to know what the learning in the next class is going to be as well. Step number 4, and I've already mentioned it really, reason and problem solving. So that curriculum that you deliver, it's got to have opportunities where children can put their mathematical learning into context. Okay, this could be about real life situations in which they are then going to put their understanding of maths into practice. It's preparing them for adult life, preparing them for life outside of school. They have to have a sufficient understanding to be able to know what those concepts are and those procedures are and how they can then link them. Okay, so key phrase in there is useful connections. When you're looking at your curriculum, can you see the connections between it? Can you see the connections that are going to help those children understand how they're going to use maths in real life? Because one of the biggest things we don't want children doing is thinking maths is just something they learn at school. What use is maths going to have to them? So the whole of your curriculum, I want you to try and think of it as a tool for the children then using it to help them and support them in their adult life. They may only be in a primary school, some of your children may be in secondary school, but it's thinking about how they're then going to use that to help them in their life as well. area 5. I
Marcus, can I
mentioned.
just,
Oh, yeah,
can I
sorry.
just, sorry, just to stop you there, if you don't mind. I've got a couple of people asking questions. Just to remind everybody, if you've got any questions, if you scroll your mouse towards the bottom of your Zoom page, you'll see there a small icon, participants. And if you, sorry, there's participants, and there's reactions as well, polls, chats. If you click on reactions, there's a hand gesture and there's a thumbs up. If you just click one of those, that will bring you to my attention, and then we can I can unmute you. But the couple of questions that we received, Marcus, just really quickly was
I've just noticed in the chat. Sorry, I turned it off so that I could see the screen easier.
No, Marcus, not a problem at all. I'd rather you keep it off because you can focus on the slides. There's one question about, can you please repeat the 3 resources platforms? I'm familiar with White Rose. There was another.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So there's NCETM. That's the National Centre for Excellence in Teaching. And yep. They've currently just produced some guidance for teaching mathematics in schools to obtain mastery. White Rose is very much continuity to mastery that is being delivered across all the schools at the moment. And then I think the other one that I mentioned was the Mathematics Association, and they deliver very much resources that help develop mastery as well. And all 3 of those resources, they match up with the small steps that are in White Rose. So there isn't sort of like you go down yellow route, or you go down blue route, or you go down red route. They can all actually be intertwined together, used to support each other.
Great, thanks, Marcus. And just one final question: what is the advice on interleaving? How long before you revise a topic?
Oh, really? That's a really good question. So the best use of interleaving is when you understand how difficult a concept is and how often you're going to approach the concept. So it can be very much dependent on year groups. So, for example, in year 5 and year 6, they have areas to learn on ratio and proportion and on algebra. And therefore, there isn't a bigger part of the curriculum for you to revisit. So for me, the best skill in interleaving is knowing how long it's going to be before they start to forget those concepts and making sure they're linked. So if it's a concept like that, I would be bringing it into small, everyday beginning of lessons and starters for your lesson, and regularly. If it's a concept that's covered a lot, so for example, in Key Stage 2, we could be talking about fractions or calculation methods, you will naturally, there'll be links with those quite frequently. But my perspective of that is that the best interleaving is frequent and small, not big chunks of revisiting and big chunks interleaving as well. I hope that answered the question of the person who asked.
That's great. Marcus, just one final thing, and that would be me staying quiet. If you, where possible, if you could give as many secondary examples as possible, because I think most of our delegates are secondary school teachers and leaders.
Yep, okie, and I'll try and do that as well, yep.
Okay, thank you.
It's all right. So I'm just going to go back to revisiting. With what I've just been asked in mind, when you're revisiting, the curriculum across Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 almost has the revisit built into it. So if you have a look at the structure of those planning systems that you would get from White Rose or from NCETM, you will see that the revisiting has little sections in each of their plans to look at what the prior learning was. So with the interleaving and revisiting there, I very much think that's included for you. I don't think it's a massive amount of issue if you look at those resources there. Another little part that's often looked at in framework that is missed in general is the independent nature of children to be able to build on their maths learning, whether that's building on it at school in lessons, in free time, but also in homework that they're doing. So the much that you can do in your department to embed independent learning and an enjoyment of the subject, the more that will then show in children in school, but it will show also in the way that the children go home and want to extend their learning more. And it also develops that growing self-confidence in their own ability. Area 6, now this goes back into your interleaving in a way, if you like. The EIF is looking for flexibility in the curriculum so that schools can address gaps and filling gaps in pupils' knowledge that hinder their capacity to learn and apply new content. Okay, so it's knowing that at times there'll be topics that you think, okay, I was supposed to be teaching them for week 3, week 4, and week 5, but at the end of week 5, the children don't have a level of understanding that you feel happy with. But then making sure that you have that flexibility to address those gaps in pupils' learning and go back to it. So one of the things I would ask you to ask the teachers in your school is, when do they go back to fill in those gaps? How often do they go back and look at them? And if they don't, does this then hinder the capacity of those children to learn new content when you come to it further on? So those pupils that are behind age-related expectations, they're given opportunities to learn the mathematical knowledge and skills necessary to catch up with their peers, whether that's through planned intervention, one-to-one support, tuition or coaching. It has to be that you as a school have an identified strategy for how you're going to deliver that and how you're going to cope with it, and also how somebody is going to let you know and inform you of it. Assessment, key across the school. This isn't about tests, okay? Tests are a small tool within assessment that can help and support, but assessment that's ongoing, that's done in lessons, that's done after tasks, that's done as you work with the children, is the key part to making sure maths is working to what children need, working towards the stages that they need to get to, the expectations for their age. So use an assessment in a different way. So it could be through mini tasks, it could be through an assessment, a test, if you like. It could be through having key questions that you ask at the beginning of a lesson and you ask at the end. Having those planned questions that you are going to use to identify when a child's attained and when a child has a gap, then what you're going to do about it. But assessment being a key tool that's identified in the inspection framework. Then this is a relatively new area across maths. It's something that's been around for a long time, but we're talking about manipulatives and resources, whether that's interactive ones that are on an interactive whiteboard and a computerized version, or whether that actually is practical equipment. It can be in a primary school, can be in a secondary school, but it's making sure that children have the resources to enable them to understand mathematics and do it in a way that's suited to them and adapt them and supporting of them. And the other aspect of that is modelling. So a teacher modelling how to do a question. If we're talking about primary, it could be calculation method. If we're talking about secondary, it could be about modelling it for different types of number. It could be modelling with different types of approaches. It could be modelling at an easy level and a harder level. But it's not just about questioning the children and giving them activities to do. It's about modelling and role modelling in front of them an approach that they could use. And that's mentioned quite a few times in the education inspection framework for them. And I'm just going to have a look. I just think there's a couple more questions there. The non-associated, okay, wasn't a question for me, it was for somebody else. Mathsbox does have weekly skills check, yep, and having a weekly assessment that was going to help you is a really good strategy to use. So a lot of schools will use things like Fluent in 5 that you can get from people like Third Space Maths, but a lot of people will use the White Rose Maths assessment at the beginning of the topic and at the end of the topic, but it is about regular revisiting an assessment, make sure and check that children are in the right place. I would also look at MathsBot and MathsWatch if I was talking about using manipulatives that you then use in school. Just to give you some practical examples, they have interactive whiteboard versions or computerized versions. You can go and model from the front, and then children can actually use them on their own computers as well, or on a tablet. But you can also have, of course, home use of those as well, because the majority of them are web. Key area for me as a leader in my own capacity, making sure that teachers, especially non-specialist teachers, have the content knowledge they know to be able to deliver effectively. Now, we all know that when we're planning CPD, continuing professional development for staff, very much often done on a general approach, what the whole school needs, and not necessarily done on a individual personalised basis. Well, the inspection framework now is looking at schools having a really good understanding of every single one of their teachers and knowing where their subject knowledge is so that they can deliver the topics effectively. So a key thing there is regularly auditing the needs of your staff, but also regularly auditing the quality of their teaching and how much their subject knowledge is supporting the learning of the children. I very much think that having an approach where you identify them as the subject leader, but also work with the members of staff to identify them, is the approach to go down. It's not just about making a judgment yourself. It's about, as I go right back to the beginning to my original comment, it's about working together as a team so that everybody in that team knows that it's okay for different people to have different levels of expertise, and you can then share that level of expertise and knowledge. But CPD doesn't necessarily need to be on a course such as this. It could be that they're getting CPD by watching and observing another colleague in practice, working with a similar group, working with a different age of children. Or it could be a key teaching skill. So it doesn't definitely have to be the mathematics subject knowledge. It could be that key teaching skill that they could see somebody teaching if they were teaching science, if they were teaching geography. But it's about identifying those needs and making sure those needs of the teachers are met to enable them to teach the most effectively that they can. Area 10, another new area that has been, I suppose, focused on in the last 2 or 3 years is about children's ability to talk their mathematics. So it's about understanding how to explain to their friend, their teacher, somebody else, the method they've used, their thinking, their understanding. Now, what better way to do that than when they're using the correct vocabulary? So one of the key aspects that the inspection framework talks about looking for when they're judging your curriculum, children being able to use the correct mathematical wording and using it across the curriculum, using it throughout their learning. So mathematics appears as a standalone part of the curriculum, but mathematical skills can also appear in other subjects. So in a secondary school, you'll see a lot of mathematics content in geography, in terms of graphs and data handling, but also in terms of science. Across science subjects, when we're talking about making calculations within physics, chemistry and biology, calculations is key. So if your teams have an understanding of what your whole school policy is, calculation, then you can make sure that those children going forward are capable of doing their subjects to a much better level. So their maths can often impact on those other subjects. I know English does, and everybody thinks English is one that, and their writing skills and their reading skills, but actually their ability to complete maths is very often ones that will hinder people, and children in particular in secondary in science and geography subjects. Also ones such as business studies, where they are analysing data. The last 2 areas that I want to comment on there are, these are questions I think you could ask your school. Okay, what would your children in your school say if you asked them, do they use maths at school and in life? Okay, what would they say to you if you asked them if the things that you taught, how are they using them, where are they going on to use them? Would they say, no, we only ever do it in school, I don't do it anywhere else? Those are the areas where children tend to become disaffected with their learning. So it's actually trying to make links between the things that they're using in a maths lesson to the things in their real life. Second key question I'd ask you is, can staff identify when pupils get a chance to use their maths skills in context? So do your staff give them those opportunities? Is it recorded? Is it shown? Do you have a cross-curricular, if you like, whole school curriculum? So you have evidence in your maths curriculum of all your maths that's being taught, but then do you have evidence of it where it appears in your science, where it appears in your geography, where it appears perhaps in your music? And if it appears in those areas, can you be specific about why? Because the inspection framework will look at how those subjects work together in a school, not how things stand out on their own, but how your curriculum is intertwined and linked. Okay, so what will a deep dive look like overall? So the perspective I'm going to give you here is very much of an inspection deep dive. But what I also want to do is give you the understanding of how you can use deep dives as a tool to use in your school for monitoring and assessing the quality of the curriculum that you're teaching. So I'm going to give it to you on two perspectives, okay? So if we're talking about inspection, there's four key areas. Generally, about an hour of looking at books. So looking at the work that's in the books, seeing the link between them, seeing the quality of the work in there, seeing if the work is age appropriate and the work is stretching for children, and that all important word, challenging. And I'll go on to that in a second because I'm going to break all of these down into a single area. Then it's about talking to staff. So in the past, inspections have tended to just talk to leaders. Now, inspections involve talking to a range of staff who teach the subject. So you could have, during the conversation with a maths subject leader, classroom teacher involved. It could be a support member of staff involved. And the thing about that is, that's where I want to go back to that phrase I used at the beginning about singing together. So each of those people involved in that conversation know why they're teaching a specific way, the leader knowing what's going on in the classroom. So if you ask the leader what topic was being taught and what's being covered in each of the year groups at that time, they have that understanding and knowledge to be able to answer that question if they were asked. Then you've got the area of spending time in the lesson, okay? Excuse me, spending time in the classroom, seeing how maths is delivered and the quality of the way it's delivered. As a result of that, you'll then get a conversation with pupils. Okay, it's asking the pupils about if they feel that they have the maths skills to be able to approach maths learning. And I'm going to go on to some key questions that you can ask children, staff, and you as a maths subject leader in a minute to give you an idea of the sorts of things that you might want to look at. And these are built on good examples of outstanding Ofsted inspections that the Trust has recently had, and the types of questions that were asked there to help you have an understanding of where starting points are. They're not going to be the whole of the questions because there is masses of them, but I've selected the key ones that were felt by the staff in those schools were the ones that they had to make sure they worked on with other staff and everybody knew the answer to them and everybody felt comfortable asking those questions. So in the Chiltern Learning Trust, we have a monitoring tool that we use across our schools, which looked at those areas. The deep dive involves meeting the subject leader. It involves lessons and work scrutiny. It involves meeting with pupils. It involves meeting with teachers who've been involved in those visits to the classroom. So it's about talking to them after their lessons, bringing all that together and making evidence and connecting that evidence. So the Trust uses it as a monitoring tool within the school to see the quality of the maths curriculum, triangulating things and then reviewing them. Is what the maths subject leader tells you is happening in the classroom, what you then actually see in the classroom. Is what you then see in the classroom reflected in what the children say is helping them in their learning? Does that then match with the learning that you see in the children's books? I've mentioned this very briefly previously at the beginning, but the importance of a deep dive is not just for Ofsted, but it's making sure you've got an outstanding curriculum development and ongoing practice. So it's not just about the inspection process, it's about developing brilliant curriculum and brilliant practice within your school. Anybody who comes into your school and does a deep dive, what they see in a maths deep dive will give them a really good impression of what goes on across the rest of the school. So you almost need to think of a deep dive as a celebration, if you like, of the learning as well as the monitoring tool. So it looked at the day-to-day culture, and it's checking that what is happening is actually what you as a maths lead are saying is happening and what your documents are saying is happening as well. So making those triangles that I was talking about earlier. So embedding all the activities in the school department and the subject leadership across all the age groups, not just in a couple of key age groups, but across the age groups. And I just want to reinforce what it says at the bottom there. Don't make the changes just for an Ofsted or an inspection purpose. Make them because you know that they're going to have an impact on the teaching and they're going to be long term and they're going to support the staff. So if I talk about the normal inspection and what we've seen so far, it's 1 hour of meeting with an inspector. And it's making sure that you have a really clear understanding of the 3 I's, those being intent, implementation, and impact. The 3 I's are mentioned across the inspection framework and in the inspector's report and in the handbook as well. So it's about being prepared. You know the intent. So do you have a mapped out curriculum? Do you have mapped out links, like I've said, with how it relates to other subjects? Can you show the progression of your curriculum across the age groups, from the beginning point of a child in your school to the end point when they leave, but also from 1 year to the next? Is this shared across the school? Okay, so do every member of staff in your school know what the map looks like for the whole school, not just a little bit that they teach? That's good, but they almost need to know the skills around the outside of it and where it comes from. The meeting with a subject leader. Okay, so on this page here, I've talked about knowing your 3 I's, knowing your intent. Here, it's about having an action plan and thinking ahead. So they will want to look at your long and medium term plans, and they will want to know that you've reviewed them regularly. And they might want to get you to justify the reasons behind why you've got them structured how they are, and any changes you've got to them. It's okay for things to be worked in progress, but you have to have a reasoning and a justification for how you've got them planned. That's why I'm going back to my saying that I said at the beginning about knowledge is power. You can see it at the top there. The maths subject knowledge leader needs to come to the fore here. They need to show their skills. They need to show their understanding, not just of the curriculum, but also of the staff. So my second point here is about showing that they can plan effective CPD. So that could be for an audit of the staff and reviewing that subject knowledge with them. It could be about getting staff to share an approach, a pedagogical style that they're using. And it's about methodically planning that CPD to meet any gaps, especially when it comes to new staff. So making sure that when a new member of staff starts in the school, that you audit where they are, you audit what needs they might have, and you plan to support those needs going forward. I covered a little bit about the 3 I's earlier, but if you were to look in the education inspection framework on pages 9 and 10, you'll see a big shift from a heavy data focus to a new era of focus on the curriculum and the pedagogical approaches that you're using. That's why knowing your 3 I's are really important. So if you think of the intent as, why do I deliver the curriculum, how I deliver it? Why do we teach this at this point? Why do we have this structure in place? Why do we use this scheme of work? The implementation, you need to think of as the how. How do we teach it? Do we have set calculation policies across the school? Do we have a set curriculum for how we teach children to use a particular skill? If not, is there reasons for that and justifications behind it? The last one is what. As a result of your why and your how, what happens? Okay, what's the impact? Can you say what the impact is? Can you identify the impact of your intent and your implementation? Your curriculum documents, and I think I'm going to give you an idea of a best practice idea and an activity that you could try doing in your school, and then I'll see if there's any questions before we go on to the next section. So curriculum documents we're talking about medium and long-term plans that the subject leader can talk through. My understanding and knowledge of it is that the subject leader doesn't have to necessarily know the day-to-day of what's going on in the classrooms, every single classroom, but that they could go to their curriculum documents, they could pick them up and say, this is what should be being covered in this class at this time. This is what this class has previously learned, and this is what this class will go on to next. Your curriculum documents are backed up with reasoning and case studies. You've got a reasoning behind why you do the curriculum the way you do and why it's delivered in the order it is. It's okay, as I've already said, to explain what's new and it's in development, okay? But you need to be able to justify why. So again here, I've already said this once, the subject leader needs to really come to the fore here. This is where they show their real knowledge of maths in your school. okay, and where you get to showcase your design and your rationale behind your curriculum and the approaches you've chosen to your teaching. If you're using White Rose, your approach about using concrete, abstract, pictorial ideas for your teaching, and making sure that children get a variety of those in their learning and in their regular lessons. It's also about making sure you've got a shared efficacy and an organisation of those three I's. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes, and probably about a minute to try and squeeze the time down as I have to jump off for a second. A best practice idea for you, and try doing it yourself, okay? If you had to develop a bullet point list, 5 key points, what would you say the most effective features of your curriculum are? So you could change that to what is the 5 most effective features of your pedagogy in maths, but what is the 5 most effective features of your curriculum in maths? It's a question that you can ask the subject leader, you could ask leaders in your school, you could ask the teachers, and you could ask the people who are supporting them as well. So I'm just going to give you 1 minute, because I want you to think about what you think those 5 key features would be if you had to talk about it for your curriculum in your school at the moment. So a key thing I'm going to ask you here is, do you think that if you asked somebody else in your school the same questions, would they come up with the same 5 key points? Would some of their key points be similar? If not, how different are they? Does that give you a picture of the quality of your school? Does that give you a quality of the curriculum? Does that give you an understanding of what you need to make sure everybody's talking together? Somebody just said that in some of our member schools, looked at a set of books or spoken to pupils for a longer period of time. They've viewed a number of lessons to evaluate how the lessons move on, for example, the following day. Yep, that is the case. So that's the triangulation that I'm talking about. So they'll spend a reasonable amount of time. In the last year or so, it has adapted very slightly. But what they're looking at now is triangulating between what they see in books, what they see in lessons, and then going back and seeing another lesson to see what the next steps are in the learning for the children, to make sure that there's, I suppose, linked, but also, I suppose, direction in the way that it's been planned and the way it's been taught. But yeah, really good point from Hasina, yeah. I think what I'm going to do at that point is pause and see if there are any other questions that people have got about the slides that I've covered before I move on to links with curriculum documents and questions for different people.
Sorry, Marcus, I just thought I'll give you a minute to breathe and to take a sip of water. If everybody would just like to contribute, it'd be really helpful for us to just understand the flow of the webinar. We're an hour into it. With all of these webinars, the idea behind it is that we improve. I know we're having many discussions about how we can support our member schools going forward and how we can work with CLT on future courses. So your feedback will be invaluable. I'll share a feedback form with all the delegates at the end of the webinar as well. So Marcus, whenever you're ready, I'll end the polling here. Back over to you.
That's great. Just to build on what I was saying about curriculum documents, key questions there. This keyword ambitious. Is your curriculum ambitious, and what does it mean to be ambitious? Is there an opportunity for children to stretch their own learning, to challenge themselves, to go beyond their learning? And if you look at the mastery approach, you'll see that that's more about deepening their understanding within a subject necessarily, rather than going on to the next stages. So it's making sure that it's concrete, well understood and able to apply in different ways and apply in a practical context. Developing cultural capital to allow development in later life. Again, what I was saying right back at the beginning, are you teaching the maths curriculum that empowers children to use those skills in their outside life? When they go to the shops, when they go into their jobs, when they're building stuff at home, when they're cooking, when they're providing for themselves on an everyday basis, when they're looking at data on the television, and making sure they're understood and informed people. And once that's secure constantly, you can review and evaluate it. But that is also powerful evidence to show that children are going on to use it out of context of their maths lessons. One of the key areas that's come up in the inspection framework that somebody mentioned to me only 2 weeks ago and made me reflect a little bit on the maths curriculum is the ability to read, okay, and how reading and literacy are used across the curriculum. If you look in the inspection framework, it's pretty key that they're going to ask you questions about how schools reinforce reading skills in maths lessons. Are there opportunities for children to read in their maths lessons? Are there opportunities for children to write, use skills to explain their learning? Very often, a maths curriculum is based on pages of calculations, or a calculation that's in number form, rather than children having to use, and students of all ages having to use their reading skills to interpret what they're being asked. So are there opportunities for children to develop language that's involved in that? So one of the key things I would ask you to think about in your maths curriculum is, do you have any kind of vocabulary structure in there? Do you have a way of developing vocabulary? So is that rigorous? So do you have it that it's timetabled and structured, so keywords are learnt at certain times? And is it therefore embedded in the curriculum? Are children using it in the conversations that they're having when they're responding to a teacher, when they're talking to each other? And another key skill that I've seen mentioned quite a lot in recent inspections is the ability of a child to be able to ask a question. Now that's asking a question to cement their understanding. Ask somebody else why they've used the method that they've used. So for example, if a child would use a particular method for multiplication and another child uses a different one, that they have the opportunities to justify and explain their learning. So one of the best examples of that I've seen is the use of STEM questions and sentence starters. So teachers giving children the opportunity to say, I got the same answer, but I used this method because. I would answer the question this way because, and justifying and using those language skills while also developing their mathematics. It's also about making sure that they're using the right word. So an example of that that I've come across in the last couple of weeks with children in secondary school is a child using, I know I've done really well in my lesson today because I've completed a page of sums. Now, the word sum means total, means addition. So the correct vocabulary would be they've completed a lot of calculations, because the word sum means when you add things together. They'd actually completed a load of fraction questions where it was all to do with dividing and multiplication. There wasn't an addition used at all. So in reality, they were misusing the terminology and not using it accurately enough. Some of that starts very young, but a lot of that needs to be reinforced, and needs to be adjusted, and needs to be addressed. So in a secondary school, one of the things that Ofsted have looked at frequently, and is mentioned in the EAF, is how issues with vocabulary are addressed if they're not being used correctly. Misconceptions are addressed in the way the teacher then models it or talks it through with the children. Long-term memory. This goes very much hand in hand with mastery and what it means in terms of maths. So if we go back to interleaving and revisiting right back at the beginning, what strategies are you using to do this? So do you have a particular type of activity that you do regularly with the children? Or is it through a sequential and clear curriculum? or do you use a specific approach to making sure long-term memory is developed within the children? How does it develop as children move across the school along their learning journeys? So do you have a set pattern in how you continually develop long-term memory of children, or do you only develop it in a specific year group? One of the things I would advise you to do, make sure it's wholly integrated across all your year groups at different points. So having lessons which solely focus on long-term memory and recall ability of children. What systems do you have in place in the school? And are you using a scheme for specific aspects like times tables even? Okay. People very often forget that times tables can be a big block in children's understanding as they get older. So times tables in a national curriculum terms finishes in roughly year 4, because by the time they get to the end of year 4, they should have learned all the times tables up to 12 times 12. But then they go on to use them in their use of division, their use of multiplication, their use of fractions, their use of algebra, all the way through school. And if the child is having to actually calculate 4 times 6 when they're in year 7 and year 8, it means that it hasn't entered their long-term memory. And do you have a system in your school and in your curriculum that you can use to develop that long-term memory and help support them with that, so that they don't have to spend more time? So in an assessment, they would lose time in having to do those calculations. Whereas if it was done by recall, and they know that 6 times 4 is 24, and they know that 7 times 8 is 56, they don't have to work it out. They'd have more time to approach the rest of the questions, have to check their work, go back and use an inverse method to work it out and check that they've got the answer right. There is also in the inspection framework an emphasis on SEND and vulnerable children. And the recent inspections at CLT schools came out as outstanding and identified some very specific attributes with regards to these pupils. Now, SEND and vulnerable children is a very new aspect of inspections in terms of mathematics. So I'm just going to use the key things that came out here as examples of good practice for you to think about in your own schools. There isn't a dearth of evidence of how to make sure that SEND and vulnerable children are catered for effectively at the moment in mathematics, specifically because of the world we're in the COVID situation. So the support of disadvantaged and SEND pupils is strong and well thought out. So how are disadvantaged children and SEND children going to be supported in lessons? How are they going to be catered for so that their needs are adapted for? And here it says, as a result of it being strong and well thought out, they go on to do well and often better than their peers in terms of the progress they make. Also, students felt that staff are there for them and support them. So actually, if you get the teaching of SEND and vulnerable children right, they feel supported and they feel as though they're achieving their best. They also feel empowered, able to achieve just as well as their peers. They don't feel in any way that they're left out or they're not as privileged as their peers around them. Now, one of the things that the new curriculum talks about is adaptation, and it's about narrowing of the curriculum. So it means everybody's got equality of access. They're all taught the same concepts, they're all taught the same areas, but it's adapted to suit their needs, help them understand it. So if you narrow the curriculum, those children that are not learning at an age-related expected level will constantly be there, because they're never going to catch up, they're never going to do anything at the same age-related expectation as their peers. So it's about allowing children to learn that part of the curriculum, not missing bits out, but allowing them to, but adapting it to suit their needs and support them more. The curriculum that they were based was strong and flexible, but it was also accessible to them, I just mentioned, adapted to them. As a result of that, it transforms their pupils' life chances. The support was highly effective, mentioned that one as well. They also have a high quality enjoyment of maths and the experience that they're getting. And the teachers are being ambitious. There's no limits in that version. But these are those key questions that I was talking about earlier, and I wanted to get onto these as quick as possible. So I'm not going to necessarily go through the answers with you, because these are in these slides here, but these are key questions that you could ask to help you develop an understanding and knowledge of how good your curriculum is, but how good maths teaching is in your school. Also ones that would help you support other members of staff. So for example, we've got here, do you use a scheme and why? And how was it chosen? So it's not just, yes, we've got a scheme, it's why do you use it? And how did you choose it? So having basis, that's the intent part. How do you manage progression from year to year? How do you break down the national curriculum objective? So in the case of some examples that people have given already, they use white rows because they know that that national curriculum objective is broken down into small steps which build up to that longer objective at the end. Which staff have had CPD recently and why? So as a subject leader, do you know who that is? Do you know why they've had it? Do you know the effectiveness of it? Have you spoken to them about it? How do you ensure consistency across and the quality of teaching across your classrooms? So what monitoring do you have in place to enable you to see the quality of teaching? Somebody mentioned this earlier about lesson visits and work scrutiny, so I just want to cover a little bit of this before I go on to a few more questions. So maths subject leaders know what they would see, okay? So somebody knowing where the learning fits into the sequence of learning. So if I was a maths subject leader, I would know what was coming up in those classrooms. I'd know where it fits into the sequence of learning. I'd also know what pedagogical approaches to expect to see in those classrooms, whether that's through specific tasks, specific ways of modelling, whether that's through retrieval activities, whether that's through long-term memory development activities. And therefore, were the attitudes and behaviour in those lessons, what would I expect to see from the children? So if somebody asked me before we went on those visits, I'd be able to know about those things. And I also want you to think about your books as a showing off tool and a way of recording their learning, okay? They're not total evidence of what a child can do, because the total evidence of what a child can do can also be seen in conversations with them and talking to them about their learning. So when you're thinking about a learning lesson visit, work scrutiny, think about these questions, okay? If I pick up a book, will it be evident the sequence of learning that has taken place? Will I be able to see those strong sequences that I talked about at the very beginning of this presentation? Will I be able to see them? Will I be able to see the interleaving? Will I be able to see the revisiting? Sorry, that's included in my second point now. If I pick up a book, will it be evident that pupils have revisited topics in weak areas? Then there's the bottom left-hand corner there. That's one where I was talking about singing together. Is there continuity across the classes of the same age in the same day? So just because a child's taught in a different classroom, does it mean that they're further ahead in the curriculum? Does it mean they're getting the same part of the curriculum? And is there continuity in the way it's being taught? An area that's less evident in inspections at the moment is marking and feedback. But although there's no strict marking and feedback must be done in a specific way, is there continuity in the quality of the marking and feedback that children are getting? So could a child explain the marking and the feedback that they were getting from member staff, and would it be similar in each of the classrooms because the approach has continuity across the class? So how do you prepare children? They are singing from the same hymn sheet. It's about developing a routine of speaking to pupils in their lessons and having regular questions which they're asked, because then it will develop the confidence in those children to be able to articulate that and talk to other people about it. Make sure they're not just able to talk to it about it to you, but if you took somebody else into that classroom and they asked that question, would they talk to them in the same way? Okay, so making sure they are happy and confident in talking about their maths learning, and it could be somebody that they're not taught by. So those questions you could ask, they could be checking their understanding of learning, but they could also be about what happens in lessons and why does it happen in lessons and how does it make them feel. So key questions that pupils could be asked. Do you ever get to improve your work? How do you do this? I think somebody mentioned that in a question they asked earlier, that they spent a lot of time in the classroom looking at their work and talking to the children. That question there takes both parts into account. So it asks the children to look back through their book, show where they've done work early on, and then find it later on to show how they've then improved it. What did you learn about this topic in your previous school, your previous year, your previous lessons? That's really important. So, and that proves one of the key points that I spoke right back at the beginning about children knowing the sequence of their learning. So can they picture when they last learnt about that topic? Can they say, well, I did this in the previous year and now I'm doing this, and the reason I know that I'm better at it now is because I'm using a higher level number, or I'm using a different type of number. Have you used these skills in other subjects or outside maths lessons? So a question there that's asking the children to make those links that I was talking about between subjects. So finding out whether the method that they've used for drawing a graph in maths is the same as the one that they did in physics and in geography. I understand you're learning about. Could you tell me more about this? And what did this teach you about? So that's finding out about the lesson and finding out what they've learned from it and finding out that they know the reason for why they've been learning. And a key question here, I love this question, and I think this is one that particularly young children, but more and more I'm asking older children now, can you show me a piece of work which you did well at, and how did you know you had done well at that piece of work? So the old-fashioned answer would be they've got lots of tips. The more modern approach to that and the more recent approach to that is knowing that they could show you how hard the question was or what the quality of their answer was, not just they got it right. It could be that it's one where they've been asked to explain the method they've used and why they've used it. And it's those type of questions which really show that the children have an understanding of how well they're doing, and therefore if they've got an understanding of how well they're doing, they know that they've got that information from the teacher who's helping target and direction, giving direction to their learning. Preparing staff, it's about making sure you've got personalised CPD, and it seems to have a very big focus on that now. So it's about having an understanding in your school whether you're going to have non-negotiables versus negotiables. So are you going to have a very set structure of each lesson must have this, each planning must have this, each, I suppose, department team must have this. So having a style is okay, but access and equality mustn't be changed or narrowed for the children. So teachers can have their own style, but making sure that every child across the different classes is getting the same approach and the same level of resources and the same curriculum delivery. And knowing the schemes of work and policy documents and where to find them, so that a member of staff can say, this is the scheme of work that guides me on my learning, this is where we are at the moment, and this is how I know that lessons need to be taught, and this is the policy of how our lessons should be structured at our school. So if I'm talking about preparing staff, it's got to be ingrained in the culture. Having regular deep dives of a subject across the school, they give all staff an opportunity at different levels to win in their roles. And it also gives them a chance to participate in knowing the questions to ask and their own staff development. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the maths subject leader, it could be the maths subject leader and one other teacher doing those deep dives so that they both learn together, they both have a higher level of understanding of maths. Know the progression of the small steps of the year group taught, but also the year before and the year after. So hoping your staff will know what these children have had previously. And there we go, I've mentioned it again. White Rose Small Steps and the NCETM guidance papers that have just come out, they are absolutely fantastic at giving you exact examples of where children's prior learning is and children's current learning should be. Draw maths into other subjects and feel confident in using it. So your non-specialist teachers can teach really well, but also your specialist maths teachers can then deliver it in other subjects as well. And a member of staff can quickly and easily explain where their subject knowledge has come from, how it's been built, and what support they've had. So sharing good practice within your own school, it shouldn't just be about monitoring, it should be about sharing together. So people know where those areas of expertise are in the school, so that you can go and watch children, and go and watch teachers teach in a specific way. I'm just going to check that there wasn't another question up there. Yeah, in a secondary maths lesson, I think you're more open to an opportunity to develop vocabulary there, and you're also a proportion of your, so you do need to designate a proportion of lesson time. I wouldn't say you have to have a lot of time spent on it, but having opportunities in each lesson for children having to read, interpret the text, comprehend and understand what it's asking them. So it's not necessarily about having lessons that are teaching them how to read a maths question, about having opportunities to read, pick the vocabulary that's used in those questions apart, and knowing what each of those vocabulary means. The best approach I've seen in secondary school is very much underlining of keywords, and asking children to make sure when they're asking the question, they're either using those keywords or they're using those keywords in their explanation and their sharing of their method with a partner, or giving them a sentence structure for the beginning of the sentence. But I do believe that actually you don't have to have set reading sessions with them, but you do have to have the opportunity for them to read and work out what maths that they've got to use. There isn't any reason as well why you shouldn't be still displaying key vocabulary. So just before a lesson and for the lesson of the week, having 5 words that you're going to display. So in a primary school, it could be that you reward them every time they use them accurately. In secondary school, it could be that they notice those 5 words used within the questions and how what meaning they have, and that they can explain the meaning of them or give a dictionary definition to their partner. I hope that answers that question on vocabulary there and how much time needed as well. Staff, other ones, is the marking in maths meaningful? How do you know it's having an impact? So if I asked a member of staff how they mark, could they tell me what impact it's having and how effective it is? Then what training opportunities do the school, the trust provide for them? Can they give an example of a good one? These questions, I would be asking these regularly. I'd be asking them as often as I could as maths subject leader, but making sure that you give people the ability to be able to answer them if they don't. So if they're not aware of the answer, share it with other members of staff, get the teams talking about it together. So how do you assess the progress of children in maths lessons? Could you show me this in a book? I'll go back to, I think it was Hosina's question right at the beginning. If you remember what she said, in a couple of your schools already, the inspectors have spent time looking at the books. Now that's not necessarily looking at the quality of the work in the books, that's looking at have the children progressed on in their learning in that area. It's not progression necessarily in the fact that they can now answer the question. It's has the level of difficulty moved on? Have the links moved on? Is it moved on to another area of maths? And can you see that roadmap, if you like, that journey that they've had? What do you do with struggling teachers? So if I asked a teacher in your school, what would you do if a teacher is struggling? Oh, sorry, what would you do if a child is struggling? Would there be continuity of approach? A set way that the school has to supporting struggling children? Is it through intervention sessions? Is it through supporting lessons? Is it through coaching? But the staff know what should be in the policy. And do you have a scheme of work and why is it used? Okay, so it may be that as maths subject leader, you've introduced a scheme of work, but you've got to get buy-in from the staff as well. You've got to get them to understand why you're using it, the qualities of it, and how it's used effectively within the school. So I just want to go back to those things that I mentioned at the beginning. Be prepared. That's be prepared at all levels. That's your children, teachers, subject leader, school leader, and governors. Okay, asking those questions regularly and understanding from them, do they really know about how maths is taught? Do they know the curriculum and do they know the key structures that you have in place for teaching? Singing together, making sure that everybody understands as a team the maths teaching, the maths curriculum, the maths policies, and that they can say the same thing. The worst thing is if you could get 3 teachers and they all give a different perspective of why the curriculum is taught the way it is. It's about them understanding why you teach the way it is. And the best thing to do that is to make those decisions themselves together. So you as a team, making sure that you've got a strategy in place which works for everybody. Knowledge is power. So that's about subject knowledge, proving that you have filled those weak areas. So if a teacher is struggling with a certain area, that they can say that, but they can also say that I'm getting support here. Okay, I'm getting support in my development of this subject. I've got CPD or I've got a coach. or I'm observing this teacher because they teach well in that subject. So it's okay to admit that there are weaknesses, but it's what are you doing about those weaknesses? Triangulation and review, that's about making sure, and I'll go back, and I think it was a really good point that somebody raised right at the beginning, that what they'd seen in an Ofsted inspection. I'm just going to have a quick look through the questions, and it was, they've looked at a set of books, spoken to people for a longer period of time, they've viewed a number of lessons to evaluate how the lessons move on. That's exactly what I'm talking there. Triangulation, it's making sure that what they see in a lesson matches what they see in the books, make sure it matches what they see and what children say, and what the teachers and the leaders say. So I just key that. I think that's a really key point to go back to, and I think it was very well raised at the beginning. And so I'll say thank you very much to that person who raised it. I've come to the end of my slides, but I'm willing to throw the floor open now because I knew that we said we'd give 10 minutes at the end, and I've probably got 5 minutes at the end to answer questions, but I'm more than happy to do that. I just want to quickly answer a question that has just come up though, so I'm just going to have a quick look. What's the advice where the school doesn't have many subject leaders? This framework is more suited. Okay. If you have subject leaders that work across a range of subjects, yes, it is more of a challenge. But again, it's making sure that you do things like this as a team. So your maths and English subject leaders work together, your geography and maths subject leaders work together, and they do the deep dives in your school. So it's about making sure that those people who are going to be the people who are going to speak about it have that knowledge. Yes, that will work in a very small school, but also in a very big school. I hope that answers your question. If you want to come on and I'm sorry, I'll get Abdul to tell me if I've answered that question well enough, or if there's anything else you want on that question. I'm perfectly willing to extend, if you like, if you've got something else you want to say.
Marcus, thank you very much for taking us all the way up until 6:26. It's been a very enlightening session. I'm sure from the results of the poll, you'll see that actually the vast majority of our delegates, our audience, have enjoyed it. And I think I won't be surprised if if we're working together again and you're delivering another one or more webinars to get in a little bit deeper into some of these topics, because it's a big subject.
What I will say is I'm more than happy to have email sent through that I can try and answer as well. Sure. But what I will say is I do believe in those 8 sessions you've got booked, you have got some very experienced people who will be able to make those links, because that question there I think is very relevant about not always having subject leaders who are just one subject. I think you'll get a lot from a couple of the other people that you've got delivering sessions on teaching and learning subject leaders, if you like, and the role that they can play in a deep dive, and analysing the teaching and learning across a variety of subjects as well. Yeah, definitely. And I think, as one of my colleagues, Hasina, has mentioned, we've been kind of busily taking notes down about the things that we as AMS need to take away and what we can do moving forward. And that's certainly one of those the things that we can do to support our schools. Just to remind everybody, the session has been recorded and will be up on the AMS YouTube page over the next few days. The slide deck that you viewed and any other resources will be shared with you over email again over the next couple of days. I will be sending everybody out a training evaluation sheet, just 4 or 5 questions, just to give us a bit of feedback, what you liked, what you disliked, what we could improve on, etc. That'd be really appreciated. And aside from that, I don't really want to go beyond 6:30, Marcus, because I'm conscious of your time. And I'm also conscious that you know, people probably got other things planned for the evenings. No, I'm grateful for the comments as well. I've just read through a few of them as well. Really supportive comments in there, and actually taking away what they're learning, sharing it with each other. So yeah, great comments and feedback as well. So I accept all of those. And if you do need me back, I'm more than willing to come back and focus on some individual aspects. Sure, no problem. Just one final thing from me then. If I could just take over the screen for a moment.
Marcus, can you see this?
No,
Marcus?
not at the moment.
Okay.
But I need to stop sharing mine. Here we go. Now you go for it.
Okay. So, can you see this, Marcus? CPD webinar series?
Not at the moment. No.
Okay, I think I've got it. Hold on, hold on. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, fantastic. I'm asking you, Marcus, because you're the only one that I can speak to. Everybody else is muted. So just to remind everybody, we've got a webinar series of 8 webinars that we're looking to cover over the next couple of months. If there's anything else that tickles your fancy, please go onto the AMS website and register. Let your colleagues know. Let other people within outside of the AMS membership also know, because this is one of the first times that AMS has opened this up to non-member schools. So that's the first thing. And then the last thing is just to bring to everyone's attention is that we have a launch event on Thursday, the 3rd of December, where the AMS is looking to launch a brand new RSE curriculum, which is, we hope, within the Islamic context. So a very a topic which is very much high on the agenda for many parts of the community up and down the country. So once again, let your colleagues know within your schools, let your local community leaders know, and get onto the AMS website, please, to register. So I think that's it from me, and that's it from Marcus. Thanks again, Marcus, for all your help. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's attended. Jazakallah khair, we really appreciate it. And from myself, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Take care.